Nice.
Good afternoon. Happy Gen Con, everybody. Yay! I have to say, I always think of Gen Con as sort of like a meat grinder of humanity. There's just like so much stuff and so much stimulation, but this has been like the best one so far. So I hope you guys are having as good of a time as I am. I see nodding heads, so that's awesome. My name is Kathleen Mercury. I am a teacher, middle school gifted kids, so I teach game design to them. I also host the podcast Games in Schools and Libraries. I've got a couple games under contract here and there, and so I just love gaming, being part of the community, and I'm really thrilled that Greater Than Games asked me to moderate the panel. But more importantly, I'd like to introduce all of our guests. In fact, I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves, provide a little biography on yourselves. After that, we'll just throw out some questions, but especially given the size of the room, the intimacy of the setting, if you have a question, by all means, feel free to either stand up or raise your hand, whatever you're comfortable with. And it's very much okay if this is if it's a discussion. It's very much okay if it's Q&A, whatever works out best, and we'll just see how this goes. So that sounds great. So Tanya, if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Tanya DePass. If you've heard of I Need Diverse Games, that was me being angry on the internet about 4 years ago. No, really, I was mad about video games. I woke up one day before work and started tweeting and have had a very strange trajectory to getting here. But now there's a nonprofit named for I Need Diverse Games. I'm also on Twitch D&D's channel as part of the Rebels Waterdeep crew. I stream as well. I'm a partner variety streamer. I'm on the podcast Spawn on Me, and recently on the announced project here, We're All Monsters Here, and I have an anthology that came out in June. So I don't sleep.
Woo! Cool. Yes!
Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan Ying. I'm a game designer. I've done a lot of work with Fantasy Flight Games, making games like Star Wars Imperial Assault, Doom the board game, Game of Thrones trivia, and I've since gone off and done some independent work with Bargain Quest, and I've also done some freelance work with IDW and Renegade Games. We just announced my newest game, Power Rangers, Heroes of the Grid. So, yeah, I am just as excited as all.
Who's green? Who plays green for Power Rangers? Who's Green Power Ranger?
Hey girl.
Oh, you got the one. You got the two. You got the two.
Power Ranger.
You're going to love it, and you're going to buy the game.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we're here for, right?
Yes. It's all about pushing merch, really.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. I've been somewhat outspoken about my desire for more inclusion and diversity in the whole industry, and I work very hard to have that in my games, which is sometimes hard when I do a lot of licensed games and the licenses aren't always diverse.
Yeah, that's
but
interesting.
you do what you can.
Almost none of them. Just saying.
There's a lot of clones and everything.
Just saying. Is it my turn now?
Yeah, go.
You're good?
Yeah, I'm good.
I don't want to step
Please,
on your
please.
toes. My name's Eloy LaSanta. I'm the owner of Third Eye Games as well as a co-owner of New Agenda Publishing. I write games that are low-key about immigration, and I write games about gods and all kinds of dealing with personal stuff and dealing with race and all that stuff. The latest game that I've written, which I assume is the one that got me on this panel, is with my new company called New Agenda, where we are actually one of the first RPG companies that is owned by multiple people of color, and we're making that as a big statement, and we're bringing in other people of color to mentor them and make sure that they can all come in and have a place in the RPG industry. And our game is called Rune, which is Afrocentric, post-apotheosis, sci-fi, space opera RPG. And it's a mouthful, and I apologize.
It's one of my favorite words.
But it's one of those things, and I'll tell a story of why I actually kind of I've always been low-key doing the diversity thing, and why this year I actually started hitting it, but I'm not going to tell it now because that would be taking up too much time. So I will pass the mic. I will tell you guys though.
We'll get there.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kira Peavley. I'm the CEO of Kolossal Games and Maple Games. We have, I believe that I was asked to join the panel because our games do a fairly good job with diversity, unintentionally probably, just because we just look at it as these are who should be in our games, and it's kind of a little different concept and more just look at the game and say who's missing, and a little bit less of I think it's just our team is really good at thinking through that stuff without having to actually think through that stuff. So really excited to be here with such a great group of people. So thanks for having me.
See, I talk too much.
No, you did a great job. So we also have our elusive fifth guest, Isaac Vega, should be joining us soon at some point as well. So we'll see whenever he comes flying in the room.
Let's make a bet. I'm gonna say 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
That's it.
Anyone want to go?
Timer.
Want to go to 5?
I'm
5?
gonna
I'll say
say
5:50.
4:31.
I'm gonna say he's actually under the table. And
It
was
me all
He's already here.
All right. That sounds about right. So the description for the event: Rise of Diversity in Gaming, more inclusion and diversity in the community, game design, layout, art, entertainment. So pretty big umbrella in terms of that. So I think the question I want to start with is, why is diversity and inclusion important? Why should we even be talking about this now?
Because games forget brown people exist, and our money is just as good as everyone else's. And this may sound a little bitter, but a lot of times we talk about this diversity 101, why it's important, why we need to remember it. But then I wonder if people have ever gone outside and gone online. No, I'm being serious because I always get the question, I can't find brown people, I can't find queer people, I can't find fill in the blank marginalized identity, or if we do that in this setting, it won't be real. Historical accuracy, etc. And it's like, as long as people don't question it and assume white is default, we keep having to come back to this 101 conversation.
I think that's a really good point too, is that because the world is diverse. I mean, that's the straight up answer, right? Is the world is diverse. And so what we see on our screens, what we see in the world that's presented to us on the internet and all the movies and everything, it's getting better, but it's not quite real yet, right? And I get it. We're going to have those opportunities where there's not a race necessarily, but that doesn't mean there can't still be diversity in those games. Or in space, it shouldn't be all a bunch of tall, skinny,
It's a lot of different
people,
vectors.
Right.
whatever, with blonde hair
Right.
and white skin or
Right.
whatever. So I imagine that in the future worlds, that as we go and expand out into the universe, we're going to see that same diversity. And so, making sure that we reflect what the world really is super important.
Right.
I mean, it's funny because I go around everywhere and I see white people, black people, all kinds of different races and genders and all kinds of craziness. And then I'll pick up a book and everybody's tall and blonde and white. And it's like, I don't understand it, right? So I agree. It's the world is diverse. Stuff should be diverse. People should be able to see themselves in your product no matter who they are. They should be able to pick it up and say, even if it's not the star that I'm identifying with, I like that one over there in the back or whatever, they should be able to see themselves. And honestly, from like a publisher or game designer or whatever, point of view, you should do those things because you don't only want white people's money. So there's also that, because yes, we're all in it for the passion and whatnot. It's also a job.
Capitalist
argument
and
is you will appeal to the whitest audience if you cater to the whitest audience,
Right.
if you go in that direction.
So even from for this is a little more of a selfish philosophical standpoint for me. I love gaming. I love games, and you'll get a very limited style of game if you limit the creators and the people who want to participate in the medium to one demographic. So the more people we get playing games, the more people we get designing games,
Right.
the more people we get designing different games designed by different people with different backgrounds.
Right.
And those are, we all prize innovation and value cool new things. And so when voices that aren't normally heard get to be heard, cool stuff happens. And I want to play those games, that is not the biggest reason why I do these sort of things, but it is a very significant, that desire, the fact that I know that there are a lot of games by designers of color or any marginalized community who just don't have these opportunities, whether they financially or culturally or whatever. What amazing games are we missing out on right now? Because those people don't feel welcome in our communities,
Right.
because they don't see themselves reflected in our games and don't think that games are for them,
Right.
or board games are for them, or RPGs are for them.
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, even further on that, you're thinking about in schools and kids and stuff, and really, one of the things that I really love hearing, and I don't mean that my particular games are not really young kids for our games, but we will be soon. But not that everybody is going to play as a character that looks like them every time, right? But having a person, kid, child, adult, doesn't really matter, look at a game and go, that's me, or this looks like me, or I relate to this character, or, you know, that's just a character I really like, and not having to say or be pigeonholed into a particular thing. So, you know, like if you're sitting at a table and you're a young girl, I coach a robotics club too, and it's really important there too, because it's, again, an area where there's not a lot of young girls in STEM and things like that. It's another area in the whole arts community, but like, I can do this too, I can be a part of this too. I don't have to be the pink character, I don't have to be the one wearing the skirt.
Or with the bow.
Or with the bow, and I don't, you know, I can
Right.
be, I can play the boy, I can play, you know, I can play the adult, I can play the kid, I can do whatever I want, I can play the dog. You know, whatever I want to play in that game and feel good about it, and have those choices, I think are very important.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think too, like for myself as a teacher, my students, you know, male, female, they all design games. I've got kids from, you know, whose families are from all over the world. So when it comes to like the traditional demographic of gamers, and you tend to think heavily skewed, you know, white male, that's not what it looks like in my classroom. And so when it comes to the games that I put down my table, you know, it needs to be reflective and inclusive, because kids need heroes. Not every game is about heroes, but, you know, they need to be able to see themselves in that sort of aspirational way, like, I want to be that person. And you're right, like, if it's, in games it always was like maybe the one female character, and it was like the default that nobody wanted, you know? And so now to make it more like diverse across the board, it makes it more inclusive, because they don't necessarily see it as an us versus them, or all of us versus you, you know, kind of moment. Yeah, and I think that's important. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask before we kind of plow forward more? Yeah.
In a variety of the circles that I'm in, there's been like more at an organizational level conversation about how to bring people of color in, but really like what are we going to do about being more diverse, that we're not being perceived, like it's mostly a perception issue for them as brown and or as primarily for white people, and they've come up with terrible solutions, including like adopt a brown person.
What?
Oh.
Yeah, that happened.
No.
Of how to bring, okay, so the
We
question,
just all need to
Can
know
you-
where
can you
this
explain
happens
this a little bit more for everyone?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
really it's just, I
I
want
think
to
I
get it
got
on the
it.
recording so we
Yeah,
get
yeah.
the.
And that's
the-
not cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, like,
Okay.
no, I want to, let me tell you my story, because it's important, I think.
Been waiting.
I have been. I'm like raising my hand, like, please call
You're
me.
on the panel. You don't have to raise your hand.
No, so last year, I don't know, does everybody know what the innies are?
Yes.
Okay. So last year, I won an award for the innies for my game Ninja Crusade. I got up on stage and I talked about Prince, and then I got off stage and people were crying, and it's amazing. But then afterwards, the photographer came over to me. His name's Carlos, and he's a black man. And he came over to me and he said, I have been photographing this event for the last 14 years, and you are the first brother to get up on stage and accept an award. And that, like, it clicked something. Like, you know, because I've been to the awards for years, and I don't know, like, in my brain, like, it didn't click, you know? And then at that point, what I ended up doing was I went online and I said, well, how many black RPG game designers are there anyway? I found, I can count them on both of my hands and still have some fingers left over. Like, there just aren't that many. So that's actually why we started New Agenda, which is my new company, is those few game designers that are actually right now out. Like, a couple of us were like, we're going to get together, we're going to make our own company, and we're going to make a statement. We're going to hire people of color and, you know, people of different genders, people from other marginalized communities, and we're going to mentor them, and we're going to make it so that it's a safe place for them to come into. Because that's something I learned from a friend of mine who does community organizing. That's his job, is that you can't, like, representation is cool, right? I can have a black woman on my cover and yay me, like, yay diversity. But that didn't help a black woman for me to put a black woman on my cover. What does help those people who are not represented is to put them in positions of power and make them have the ability to enact their own change by using your own leverage to give them leverage. And that's where I'm going. That's what I'm doing right now. And with my companies, and because I have 2 companies now, so that's what I've been doing with my companies and with like the trajectory that I'm on. So this year there were 2 Black people who got up on stage, and I was like, that was amazing. And next year it'll be 4, and the next year it'll be more. And my goal is to make the indies black, basically. But and I actually had a discussion with one of the other Black game designers, and he said, why don't we just make our own thing? And I'm like, because what the indies represent is kind of the pinnacle of the industry. So we can't just come over here and make our own thing. We have to make them acknowledge us. And that's where I'm at. So thank you. I just wanted to share like my story and stuff, because it's powerful. Like, it hit me like a truck. So like that's been the road I've been driving on. Is like I am like all in for diversity and all of that. So yeah.
Okay, now that you've told your story, can we come back to the adopt a brown person thing?
Yes.
Because I heard that and I was just like, I'm sorry, I did not hear you.
I put work in that one. That was so
Oh,
happy.
thank you.
Okay, but so let's talk about that, because before all of this, I used to work in international education. And we get a lot of the, let's understand our international students, and there was always a food festival. Look, I like tacos. This is not the way to understand our students that are from Spain or Mexico, etc. Or let's have an international food fest and basically come and teach us your culture through food, which, okay, I'm a short, fat girl, I like to eat. However, that is not the way to teach somebody empathy and understanding, where we have these stupid ideas or I'm trying to think of stupid things that people have told me about. One friend's job tried to do a flag day. Like, this is not elementary school. Not costumes, because I would have just walked out at that point. But things like that, where it's like, we're called upon to bring diversity to the table versus people doing the work. A lot of times, people that do reach out, sometimes they don't want you to write for them just to write in their setting. They want you to write the brown character. They want you to consult and make sure they didn't screw up. Versus, I like how you write. Come write in this setting, be it cyberpunk, whatever. So the ways in which I'm trying to do this is, my nonprofit gets sent 25 people to the Game Developer Conference every year. We don't have enough money to give them money, but we can at least give them a week pass where they wouldn't have that access. Because a lot of the things we see is a lot of people don't have access, they don't have money, even coming here. If I was not sponsored by someone else, I couldn't come here, and I live a 2-hour drive away. So you have to think about the cost of us being here. Just because you can be here, I can be here, the few other brown folks we've seen, how many thousands of people can't come and meet other designers, pitch their game, or even know that that's something they can do at Gen Con. Some people may think it's just 4 days of playing games. So it's up to us to tell people, A, they're welcome, actually walk the walk, and help them get here and get the access, but then stay. Because too many programs will be like, oh, we'll help you get in the door, but then we don't do anything to actually make you stay and make you welcome and make you want to then bring somebody along with you. Because that's part of what I'm trying to do. It's like, okay, well, I'm here now. I should be bringing other people with me.
I think.
Well, I was going to say, to the point, I just want to make sure we don't lose that, because, oh my God. You stuck a fork in it, and that's the important thing, right? And I think the point is that there's an education gap when it comes to, I hear diversity. What have I seen in my lifetime? And the people that are saying that are people that grew up in a community where, when they were in school, they had an international food day to learn about other cultures. And so they say, let's have an international food day, and need a voice to say, no. Great start. Thank you for at least acknowledging we need to do something. Let's go the next step. How do we help and really, because it's coming from a good place, right? It's just really a lack of knowledge, unfortunately, and it comes off very offensive, but the point is they need to be educated. And I think that's the biggest point for all of us here, is like, our jobs in this world is to help educate and make it so that it doesn't need to have to be a conversation anymore. It just is going to be what happens. So it is, God, I just can't even imagine having that conversation.
Yeah, you see a lot of bad efforts in good faith, particularly
Yeah.
because a lot of this is not something a lot of people grew up with, right? This idea. And particularly because the infrastructure is already built in for the people, the current power structure, right? Like, I worked at Fantasy Flight Games, which was based out of Minnesota, and was, demographically, like, the people who were in the industry back in the 80s, who, like, that's kind of what cultivated it, was mostly, white middle-aged men, right? And so like, they were very nice people, absolutely, and they wanted to try, but they just didn't know. They didn't know some of these things. Like, I'm a person of color, but like I was still pretty non-woke, we'll say, when I went, until I went to a liberal arts college, where I learned a lot of things which were very valuable and were very eye-opening, right? Because even, no one has this absolute experience. I still make mistakes, even when like I'm working very hard for inclusion, but I don't know I don't know everything. And so I have to be very open to, what we did here could be perceived as maybe transphobic, and I didn't consider that before. Or like, even designing for things like differently able people, like, oh shoot, we didn't think about how colorblind people might view this part of our product. And there is a lot, and I can see how a lot of people in the industry get spooked by that. By being like, oh God, we have to keep, if we have to consider everyone, we'll have to spend hours and hours, like just going through, just several hours thinking about this. That's terrible.
What I've noticed is a lot of people look at diversity as a cost and not a quality of life improvement.
Mm-hmm.
They don't look at the return on investment, because a lot of people will come to me like, well, we don't want to be better, we want to be more diverse, but they're not thinking 5 years out, 10 years out, 15, 20 years out. They're just thinking, we have a problem, we realized it's a bunch of white dudes, fix it for us. Fix it now. And it's like, well, what's your culture like? If I go to your HR site and see job postings, is it only white people that I see on that? Because that's what I see. I'm not going to apply here because I have been the only black person in office. I'm not doing that ever again. But people don't think about that. They don't even think about the forward-facing image they present. If someone's like, oh, you're about diversity, post my job, and I'm like, what does your job posting look like? Do you have like 20 pages of requirements where a woman, a person of color, someone just starting with maybe a year out of school is going to look at that and think they can never get it because you're looking for a fit versus the best person?
I mean, and sometimes you want to, similar to that, I was at a job where I was one of very few people of color or, et cetera, in the job, and they wanted to do a new careers page. And so they were like, hey, let's get some employees for the photo shoot. And when we got there, it was me, the one, like, two women, like the one Asian woman in the company, the one black guy in the company.
The one.
And also like the most, inoffensively good-looking but not threatening white dude. And we were all just kind of posing happily together. And that was like the goal was to make the effort though, right? So like, I feel like I have very mixed feelings about it. Overall, I see like...
You're the cover of a CW show.
Right,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
because they want...
Oh my God.
They want to look like they want to be welcoming. They want to certainly perceive as being welcoming to various, cultures and backgrounds. And even though they, and they did hire us, I guess, but like, it's hard. And even those things, like, I make jokes about it, but I also, want to emphasize there was a genuine effort that they put in to like,
But that was as far as they went.
Well, let's not name names.
Later.
Well, I mean, and there was Geek Way to the West is in St. Louis. It's a convention, and for several years I ran their game design and game design contest events. And during one of the final judgings for the game design contest, one of the games in consideration was a film noir theme. And in playtesting the game in our session, there were two female characters that came up. One was the victim, and then the other was the femme fatale, and all the rest of the characters were male. And the game designer just went and found clip art. It was more or less placeholder. He didn't spend a lot of time on that. But one of the things I said was, if this game does go to production, we need to, you need to look at the characters. You need to look at the male to female and making it more look diverse. And the publisher, who's a very well-known publisher, said, well, that's the genre. Well, film noir is a fictitious genre, So I think there's some wiggle room there, But, and I think it goes back to sort of like, when we sort of hold these sorts of like, standard ideas of these tropes. And I think, the more recent Star Wars films really touched a nerve because there was a pretty big shift in terms of who we thought of as being in the Rebel Alliance and, and what that looked like and the diversity and the makeup of it. And some people really didn't like that, because it was a big shift away from, is it heavy-handed or is it more reflective of the world we're in?
Well, and we had this when I first saw Western Legends. Western Legends is the game we have at Gen Con. It was designed by a French guy who grew up on French comics that had a very specific view of the Wild West. And so his view of the Wild West was also very specific. And, he wanted to use the legends that he grew up hearing about in movies and things. And who are those? White dudes with mustaches, right? There's just a bunch of them. And I'm like, well, for starter, there are way more women in the Wild West. There are Native Americans in the Wild West. There are
Bass Reeves.
Hispanic, yeah. Bass Reeves was in the game. Like, that was the
one.
one.
That was the
right.
one.
Like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, and I should say the game started off in a pretty good place, but there was definitely a lack of women, and Kathleen definitely saw the game at a point when it had a lack of women. I was told, well, the women in the Wild West, their legends aren't really substantiated. It's hard to find information on them. I go, hold my stagecoach. Yes, I will find you. And I came back with a bunch, and granted, some of them were a little bit far-fetched, but the one obvious one is the one that should have been in there from the beginning, and she's in the game now, Stagecoach Mary. We ended up adding Pearl Hart as well, and Belle Starr to the game. All those women are in the game, and they're a diverse group of women as well. And so, Calamity Jane is in there, but everybody knows Calamity Jane. We know Calamity Jane, and yes, she's a good diverse character on her own because she didn't have the traditional female look to her. But there were more women, there were more people in the Wild West than white dudes with mustaches, and it's really hard sometimes. I think it's not even the lack of effort. It's just you go and you go, oh well, but these are the ones everybody knows. Try harder.
They'll keep being the ones everybody knows if you don't.
Exactly.
There you go.
Right. Well, and especially when the term is legends, it's not Western facts. You know what I mean? Like, you got a little bit of wiggle room there too to kind of, expand it out a bit.
Absolutely. And it wasn't even a negative thing. It's nothing.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's a view that person grew up with and didn't even know, and he was excited. Like, he was absolutely excited to see us say, "Hey, look! Did you know these other people in games?" And I think some people are afraid to. And that's the other thing I will say to the game design part of the community is that if you have somebody you're coming to and you're saying don't be afraid to tell them. They may not have that view. They want to make their games better too. Game designers, Kathleen, I'm sure you can speak to that. Like, if you see something I don't see, I need to know. And as a publisher, and that's one of the beautiful things about Kickstarter, we do a lot of Kickstarters, is that people are going to jump on there and say, hey, where is so-and-so? And you're going to be like, that is not somebody I even thought about or I knew about. Let's go add them. And so that's why we do things like social stretch goals, so people can then vote on the characters they'd like to see in the game. So anyway,
That's cool.
First.
To kind of touch on something Tanya said earlier, I've run into a lot of people who kind of at first, they view diversity as subtractive instead of additive, like what she was saying before.
Like you're bowing to the demands of these unreasonable
or
people.
even I actually had a conversation with a friend of mine who is a large white gay man. And so I had a conversation with him when I said, we're making an open call. We're looking for people from marginalized communities to come and contribute art and editing and all this amazing stuff because we really want to highlight these people. And he sent me a private message. He's just like, I just want to make sure if this is my white privilege talking before I don't want to post anything private. But he's like, literally, I just want to know, like, does that mean that you don't want to hire, white people? And I'm like, no, I guess if a white person turns in something good, I'll probably hire him. He's just like, yeah, okay, what does that mean though? And I'm like, well, I guess the question here would be, would there be a reason why I should or shouldn't hire a white person instead of a black person or whatever? And it basically boiled down to, in our conversation, was that we came to that the issue here is fear. That's basically what it is. They want their hobby to continue, and I say they, but you know what I mean. But because it's not everybody. Because it's not everybody, right? There are certain people who want the status quo, and they want to be able to look into their thing and see themselves. And it's just like, that's what we want too, though, right? And they're like, yeah, but then I won't see myself. But you don't understand. Like you said, you've been the only black person in an office. I've been the only black person at a convention before. And I was only there because they invited me as a guest, and everyone else was white.
What con was this?
They've gotten better, so I'm not gonna trash them. They have gotten better. So, but this was also years ago, before this was as large a discussion as it is now as well.
Well, and I think that's a good question. As far as the game community goes, when it comes to running conventions, how do you expand the community to be more diverse when you're coming from a place where maybe most, if not all, the organizers themselves, are pretty, homogenous? Like, how do you create meaningful outreach? How do you expand the hobby, your con, your reach, your communication in a meaningful, productive way?
I'm gonna put up Donna Pryor of OrcaCon, because caveat, I do work with OrcaCon, but Donna made it very intentional. It wasn't like, look at me, give me cookies for doing this. It was, I'm in Seattle, and there's a reason they say Seattle's so white. I want to do better because I love this hobby. I want people to feel included. And even with all of the work, all the intention, all the networking, it still winds up being a very white convention. Because again, who can afford to go all the way to Seattle for a 3-day convention? But it's being intentional, and this is going to sound sarcastic, but go outside your circles, go on the internet, because Eloy and I found each other through the internet. People that come to me find me mostly through Twitter or mostly through other people, showing what I do. Google search is your friend. You can put in black game developers. There's actually a blackgamedevs.com that you can use. So for me, when people say, well, I just can't find anyone, that tells me you haven't tried. You haven't done the work. Or I'll get someone again that comes to me, my convention needs to be better, and that translates to, give me your network of brown people so we don't have to do the work. So it means doing the work, going outside, going on Twitter, getting out of that comfort zone, and being upfront, but also paying people. But also telling people, if you can't pay them, it's like, we have a very small convention, we're trying to do better, or would you be interested in being on our convention committee? Because we want to do better in small steps, and how can we compensate you for your time? A lot of con-coms will at least cover your room or a badge or something. Because a lot of this turns into emotional labor in addition to regular labor. So if you're looking at your board, your con-com, all your guest lists, and it is white as white can be, think about who are the people that aren't getting noticed. Look up the people that are playing games. Just do a Google search. And I know this sounds facetious, but at least it'll show me that, I've looked, I can't find anyone. Do you know people? Can you introduce me to folks? And when you ask for introductions, remember, you were putting your reputation on the line, and you were saying, I can vouch for this person, or you are saying, I trust in this person enough to do this. So think about that. Pay people for the work. Think about the fact you're putting your reputation out there when you do connect people, but at least start there before you go out to other folks. But be intentional about it, and not look for ally cookies when you do it.
There's certainly two kind of angles on this, right? There's the developer side, and then there's the community side.
Right.
And both of those are challenging in their own ways.
Right.
I think on the community end, it's going to take a while. That's just the fact. It's not going to happen all at once. We've got to keep doing better. Got to keep making more games. And as kids start growing up, seeing the diversity in the ether and seeing the community be welcoming, it'll happen more. But a lot of people we've unfortunately already lost. Right? There are a lot of women who just games are hostile to me. I tried to go to a game shop once and it was real unpleasant, right? Those experiences are already out there, and we, bringing them back is a goal we can try, but also we want to make sure that we continue to do better for the future. On the developer end, there's actually interesting parallels in cognitive science, in most sciences, there are very few people of color or women comparatively to the current academia. And my partner, who's in cognitive science, has noted that women she knows get called up to panels, to panels or to events to be asked to be speakers a lot, much more often sometimes than some of their male cohorts. And that the reason for that is because these panels we need a woman. We need we need someone who is we need this panel to appear more diverse.
On that note, I'm taking that to the bank. To be honest.
Right? And
and in all seriousness, because I was doing a demo of a game with someone, and we were talking about the game, how I'm going to use this in my classroom, and he said, listen, we're looking for more women designers, and I said, tell me what you're wanting in that whole conversation. Different opportunities have been because I am a woman, because they're looking for it.
And that's cool. That is exactly what we're kind of calling on the industry to do, right? But it's also, we should be cognizant of the energy that does take.
Yes.
Isaac Vega does this a lot, right?
Speaking
he goes to a lot of these.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Isaac Vega!
The layout.
Sorry, I was late.
It's all right.
Man,
what's
if
that?
you had come 10 minutes earlier, I would have won the bet.
I said 4:31. It's 38. Well, what time did you exit? I saw you show.
Oh,
What
he
time
was
did you
here at
show?
31.
Oh,
I
we
think
start-
you got it. He just didn't come.
He was
have
close.
no
You were
idea.
closer, sir.
Wait. I was somebody was supposed to be
All
right.
Okay. No, but with all honesty, shoot, where was I?
Talk about the
You said my name.
the effort.
Yeah, I did say
That's
that.
all that matters.
There is,
No, the effort it takes.
right, as Tanya mentioned, this emotional labor and this energy to be a champion for these causes, right? It does take energy, and we need more people, more designers, more like people to kind of come to the plate, because this is a fight we won't win passively, unfortunately.
But I think it also needs to be what Tanya had said, and that's that it can't be, I need you to come write this black thing.
Right.
I get that constantly. They wanted me to write on African Changeling, and they want me to write on Chicago, and they want me to write on the black people who worked on World War II tanks. Like, I'm writing a game on World War II tanks, and I really want to include these people, so I obviously need to get a black person to write about that. And I'm like, no.
I mean, we do
that's,
make that
That's the wrong thing to do, though. It's like, I don't know.
I mean,
It is and it's not to a point.
It
right?
is and it's
Because
not, right.
Do
Just-
you want a white person writing that? Probably not, because they're not maybe maybe
Yeah.
a historian, but even still,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it shouldn't be a conversation about I need you to come in and write this piece.
Right.
I need you to come in and help me
Exactly.
look at the overall picture.
I need
So
you to
talk
be
about the
involved.
overall story and what's happening
But I
here and
get
what
that.
needs to be.
I get that pitch all the
I
time.
mean, one could argue that is development side tokenism, right?
Yes.
Like you are hired to do our token gesture
Yeah.
to that community. On the other hand, if your game is about, say, a marginalized community or even
Right.
another culture, please do hire people of that culture
Yes.
or background to work on it, because, I mean, I am a little tired of seeing, Western European names on games with Asian themes. Just a little. I mean, I love Asian themes, but there are sometimes I get a feeling when I see them. I'm like, oh, who designed this? Oh,
French guy.
Yeah.
great. Yeah, so a French designer who I really like. That's nice.
Since Isaac is here,
So,
why
yeah.
don't you just introduce yourself, talk about projects you've worked on, and just as we've been talking about the community, but we can talk about everything from design, art, whatever.
Awesome. So I'm Isaac Vega. I work for Plaid Games. I am the VP of Research and Design at that company. Some of my most notable projects are Ashes, Dead of Winter. Some of my most recent designs are Neon Gods, that we just announced here at the show.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool. How did you get started in creating? What got you into gaming?
So what got me into gaming is that in middle school, I played some competitive card games. I played the Dragon Ball Z card game. I was a big nerd. But then I kind of
God.
Yeah, I'm here.
So I put that aside when I got into high school, and I was like, I'm gonna pretend to like girls. And when I went to college, I was like, I really want to get into the video game industry. And pretty much as soon as I got to college, my professor was like, so you're going to do this for about 10 years, no one's going to listen to your ideas, and then maybe somebody will like what you want to do, but mostly you're going to be a grunt for 10 years. And that really disillusioned me. And I was like, I don't want to do that. The entire reason I got into this is because I want to tell my own stories. I want to be able to do, something interesting. So I went back home, I moved back home, and all those friends that were playing the Dragon Ball Z card game had moved into board games. And they're like, hey, come over and play this game. And I was like, Puerto Rico, what's this? And Dominion, what's this? And I was like, this is really interesting. This is a lot of fun. And pretty much as soon as they started introducing this world to me, I was like, I need to start making my own games. This would be a lot of fun to try it out. And luckily, I met up with Colby, the owner of Plaid Hat Games, and showed him one of my games. He was very nice. He hated it, but he was very nice and encouraged me to continue moving forward. And eventually I pitched him my first game, which was City of Remnants, and he signed that game. And I've been pretty much volunteering, and then officially got hired about 3 years after volunteering and trying to sign projects. And since then, I've been working for Plaid Hat Games for 5 years full time. and designing games as much as they'll let me.
And one thing I want to say, going back to like kind of circling back to our other discussion about expanding the community, you have to support programs for kids, you know, and I'm not, you know, I mean, as a teacher, like I said, I sell a lot of games by virtue of my students have a game hit the table and they like, oh my gosh, this is great. True story, my game club, one night my boyfriend came in and taught Terraforming Mars to my students, and I do work in an affluent school district, but the 4 kids who played Terraforming Mars, every single child bought that game for their family so they could play that with their family. Now, I only let games hit my table that I'm okay with. So I bought Batman Love Letter one time, and the 2 characters, the 2 female characters in it, Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, were hung in on a whisper prayer and 2 strings. And I was like, nope, not on my table. And it never saw because the thing is kids love superheroes, and you know, it's so fun to be a superhero, but I'm not going to have them see that women are just objects. I mean, yes, Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn are agents too, but just the depiction, it could have been so different. And I was really disappointed in that depiction of them as women, because it made boobs first, everything else kind of second, and I don't think that's what is important for my kids to see. So, like one of our good friends, Adrienne Azell, she's a game designer. She's doing local library, like game events, you know, for kids in the community to come and play games. She was like soliciting donations from people, and I think that's the kind of thing where getting involved, or like you said, getting that audience in before you lose them is so critically important, because you know, I'm trying to do my best to like breed generations of geeks and nerds, and I'm pretty good at it. There's a lot of kids at our local conventions that are my current and former students, you know, but there's still tends to look at like one type of kid, and so trying to really branch that out.
Well, I mean, but it's kind of like what you said, right? We have already lost some of them, so you kind of need to focus on the next, which is why I make kids games.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Like I make kids games because I was like, hey, like we should probably get more kids into this.
Right.
And I will say, because eventually all of the old white dudes with lots of disposable income are going to be gone,
right?
And we need other people to buy our stuff. Because again, capitalism does, you know, that's what continues to let me continue doing this. Is you do have to also have kind of a capitalist eye on it as well. You also need to open up those markets. But if you get them while they're young, then there is no stigma attached to it.
Right.
You know, like you asked him, like how he got into gaming, and I know a bunch of black people that the answer is I met a white friend who was into gaming and they showed me how to do it. And that's how you get into gaming when you're a person of color, because the other people of color aren't. They're not in it. They're not doing it.
Well, we're in it, but we get told that's white folk shit.
Well, that now we're in it, and we get told that. Before, I don't know. When I was 13, no black people gamed.
When I was a kid, Yu-Gi-Oh was for basically, it was actually like had a pretty broad spread for like in my social circle. Like everyone liked the cartoon.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, similar to like how, you know, and so on the note of franchises, right? Like we have a lot of existing IPs, and so even if all of the current guard of like, you know, exclusively, you know, white middle-aged men or whatever, even if they go away, the franchises they loved and the, you know, big businesses like Lord of the Rings and all that, they stick around, right? Which is why I'm so excited to see Star Wars, you know, kind of moving in this new, much more progressive direction. That's super cool, because Star Wars ain't going anywhere. Right. So, you know, that original trilogy has what? How many women? Like, what we got?
I don't know.
The galaxy is
I got
diverse.
bored.
We got 2. Anyway, I love Star Wars, right? And there is not an Asian person in the original trilogy. And, you know, so that's a thing.
Yeah.
But when working within these franchises, it can be difficult, because you have this pre-existing text that is like, and so you have to, you know, do what you can. So with Imperial Assault, for example, we worked very hard. Like we made the 2 most iconic Star Wars archetypes, the Smuggler and the Jedi. We made them women, and we made one of them a woman of color, and I mean the other one was an alien. So you know, and like we.
She had a color, right?
I mean, yeah, she was purple, so.
Yeah.
But like the, you know, having to put that effort, and there was some pushback to certain decisions that we've made, and pushback from both, you know, the top and the bottom. Like the fans and the executives made commentary and asked for certain revisions to certain things. So like, yeah, I won't go super deep into it, but it wasn't as inclusive as I necessarily might have liked. And we also got fans being like, but I want to play a dude Jedi. And I'm like, listen, like there's so many other games that already exist where you could do whatever. But no,
But
and
they
it can
want that one too.
It can be.
We want that one too.
Right, exactly. When I saw people like, can someone give me like an altered art for this character to make them a dude? I'm like, it's a piece of plastic.
Yeah.
Is this so hard for you
Yeah.
Right.
that you can't
It is
just
so hard.
enjoy playing a character just because they are female, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, I can't identify with that. Well, what do you think? How do you think I feel?
So it is so hard for them though,
Exactly.
and that's the problem. So Combo Fighter is a game we just had up on Kickstarter with Popmaker Games out of Copenhagen, and really great, cool little game. Really feels like Street Fighter. And one of the first comments that came up when we posted the trailer on BGG was, "Not enough guys." I'm like, I responded with, "It's literally 50-50."
Yeah.
Yeah, still not enough was the response, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna let that sit. I'm gonna let everybody else go and talk to that person. Cool. But what really bothered me about it is I actually went and had a conversation, with people I know, and and I was glad that we had the conversation. It was, I don't want to say they were trying to justify it,
Yeah.
but they were, from their perspective, like we grew up where when we played Street Fighter, all the characters were guys, and so when you're looking at a game that feels like Street Fighter, and you're a young man who grew up on this stuff, and you're looking at that, and you're getting that nostalgia vibe, they're like, I want these characters, and I'm like, cool,
I don't know what to do
good
with
for
it.
you.
Yeah.
There are 5 for you
Street
to
Fighter
choose
exists.
from. There are 5 for you to choose from already. One of them should totally work for you. And so the justification, I was like, are you? No. I was like, okay, I see where you're coming from, but no. Like, it's just, but no. But I do want to circle back to this kids thing because I do think it's important, and to the community as a whole, is it's not just the kids. So I do robotics at an underserved school, and these are kids that they realize, they watch me move, kind of work in board games part-time, to move into it full-time over the last 5-6 years, and they're going, wait, I can do that? I can actually do something like that for a living. That was the whole point of bringing the robotics club in, is to show, because I didn't have anything like that when I was a kid, and it sure as heck did not have girls doing that kind of stuff when I was a kid. It just didn't. Playing video games, like I had to wait for my younger brother to get the video game system so that I could play, because it just wasn't, it's not how our parents grew up, it's not how I grew up, it's not how the community was. And so how I found that school, that underserved school, and I'm local to Indianapolis, and so it's the IPS school system, that we need women helping bring more girls into gaming. I'm like, how about we just have, or not gaming, sorry, robotics. And I said, we charge, and I was like, well, you're asking me to go do a robotics program in an underserved school. So we're not going to charge the kids to come and be a part of the program. Because that's just that right there does not allow them to be inclusive.
Yeah.
It's a barrier to entry. If I say just girls, again, barrier to entry. It's not helping anybody. I just happened to get a lot of girls by accident, and that brought more girls in. And now we get to show them these other things. But how did I find it? Was through an organization that specifically is trying to grow this program and grow these programs in areas where they're not going to be. And so when you're looking for the kids, or you're looking for these communities, these cons and stuff, and you're trying to grow these communities, the point is that you go and you say, okay, so what are the groups in the community that are working to bring more diversity into all of the stuff happening in the city? So if you focus too heavily on just the gaming community, we're going to find ourselves, already, like what you said, there's not a lot of the diversity there because they've been thrown away. So you go to somebody who's actually doing the overall broader diversity part for the city and say, how can you help us grow the awareness of the fact that the community can come and pitch their games at this convention? Like, we really can we do a smaller event before where we can bring in somebody like you to talk about this with the community and say, hey, I can help you prep. Here's what you need to do. I've done this before, and just really make it so that you lower the nerves. And then these organizations also will raise money to help, like what you're saying, to bring people that can't afford to come from 2 hours away to be a part of the event, be a part of it. So we have to go outside of our little community to the bigger community to bring people in.
It's a lot of work, and
It is.
there isn't a silver bullet, which is
There's not
really
any one
unfortunate.
person that can do it on their own. We have to do it together.
And one good way that people could start, I know probably many of you have a board game collection of stuff that's so big, so much stuff that you haven't even opened up yet. All right, that's sitting on that shelf, already gained that dust. Give those games away. Give them to communities that can't necessarily purchase the games, because a lot of the games in our industry come with a 40, 50, 60, 70, 80
Local libraries.
dollar price point.
Local libraries
You know?
love board games.
Yes.
Like parents take their kids to these libraries. It's really big. Like
See, I didn't even know that.
it's
No, there's actually a gaming initiative in Chicago, and they actually host game nights, and they really focus on kids and for folks. It's like it's something you can come do as a family, and they want people to come to the library because libraries are not dead, despite what Forbes tells you. But they've got this whole initiative because a lot of people maybe didn't grow up with board games because they are expensive.
Oh yeah, you don't need like a Netflix or anything. Libraries have awesome DVD and Blu-ray libraries now. Like they just collect them.
Yeah.
It's great.
Library has video games.
Heck yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, because when I was growing up, like me playing that card game, that was all because of my white friends being able to afford that stuff, giving me the cards that they didn't want, and me desperately trying to make those cards work into an actual deck.
Trial by fire design, right?
Yes.
Well, it's probably giving you a better sense of like imbalance in games now. You know?
Imbalance in culture.
It's actually kind of interesting because like you were like reach out to outside communities and stuff like that, and like what I've been like striving to do for years is that I don't know, kind of I can only talk from the tabletop RPG side. Like I don't know anything about board games and stuff, but like within tabletop RPGs, like I was one of the founding members of a group called the Indie Game Developers Network, the IGDN, and I was the president for a few years. And like when I was the president, we saw that issue that there were a whole lot of marginalized game designers who otherwise can't make it to these big cons. And we actually end up. Does everybody know what Metatopia is? Maybe. Metatopia,
So some people don't.
Yeah. So Metatopia, as I said, Indies earlier was like, yeah, we know it. So I just want to make sure. So Metatopia is a convention. It's a play test and game design convention. It's where game designers go and they can have industry professionals play their game and help them get it all together. But of course, it's like you said, it's airfare, it's hotel, it's all that stuff, and it's a barrier of entry for a lot of people. So while I was president, we ended up starting the Metatopia Scholarship Fund that we actually were able to send one game designer the first year, and in the second year we sent 3, and in the third year we sent 8. This last year we just sent 12 different game designers. And we were able to raise the money, and then we used that money to buy their airfare, get them hotels. We made deals with the convention that we were able to kind of, skirt, cut a few corners here and there. But it's like it is definitely something that is known, like that is an issue. And yeah, like we can totally look outside, and there's probably even more resources outside. But I'm always in favor of really you kind of have to get your own house in order. So that's why it's you kind of need to we need to also fix the issue ourselves as well. So you kind of need to do everything that you can personally, which is what I strive to do. So.
Because I look at it like this: if we can come here and drop hundreds of dollars on games some of us may never open, or collectible things that are going to sit on a shelf, or special editions we can only buy at Gen Con, you can drop something like $50 to go to a convention.
Yeah.
If you see a Kickstarter, you see someone raising funds, then you can do that. Because, and I don't know what you do for fundraising, but every time I've tried to fundraise, I run to we like what you do, but then when it comes to money, there's crickets. A lot of people will talk that talk, but when it comes time to pull out the wallet, then it's something like I can't read, I don't know, and and what you want money? I don't know what that is anymore. So part of it is, or we'll see people celebrities will do fundraisers for the very things you're doing.
Right.
And they can make money hand over fist, but the same marginalized people where we're robbing Peter to pay Paul to help each other every month on Patreon, we can't even get a Kickstarter funded half the time.
Yeah.
We can't get other things funded. And then people are like, well, why don't you go to conventions? You could talk to someone at Gen Con. Well, let me break down what it costs me to go to Gen Con for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I usually use Kickstarter, and but the position that I'm in, like I've been in the industry now for 10, going now on 11 years, and like didn't start off that way. You know, it's like, you know, like I can throw up a Kickstarter now, and it's been a decade of me community building and stuff like that. And like now I just throw one up, and I just have people who are like, oh, take my money, whatever it is. I don't even care.
Oh, that sounds so nice.
You know, oh, it's really great. I mean, but also the scale is completely different, because the scale to make an RPG, it's like I need like $5,000. You know, oh, how much do you need to make that board game? Oh, $60,000. Oh, okay. You know, so like I can always get my little piddly, you know, things made. You know,
Books. People know how to make books.
Exactly.
No.
You know?
I think there have been some events that I've gone to, like I think NerdCon Stories did this, where there was a special ticket level where you buy this ticket and it buys someone else a ticket. Like there's like people who can afford it just do that.
That's
Like,
really cool.
and it's like, yeah, for people who can't afford tickets, like this ticket level, which is not that much more expensive, but will also buy someone else's ticket. And there was a big emphasis on, you know, a lot of conventions, like even this one, it is built on these communities. These people we're meeting are super cool. And so if you're paying for these extra tickets, you're bringing in cool people. It's kind of like how financial aid at college, as part of the goal of that is to bring in valuable peers that might not have otherwise been able to join you in that class. Like, and that is, it's basically, it works for conventions too. And it works
I'll
for,
do that in my next Kickstarter.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful idea.
yeah, just like, hey, sponsor
And
someone
I've
else.
never thought of that.
Right.
Good.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
The more informed alternative to what you were talking about. Yeah.
That was your solution that you had told? Perfect.
That's great.
You're brilliant then.
I mean, so for you, so are you, where do you live?
I live in Chicago.
Okay. I mean, because that's one thing too, it's like especially,
I don't know. I'm sorry.
you know, like, because especially too, you know, there's a push to like beyond convention committees, you know, for game cons, you know, and diversity, you know, like hopefully, are you involved with any up there in Chicago?
No, I really only play Pathfinder in Chicago.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna give
Does anyone?
I'm gonna just send
Do
you
you
a
know
box
Shaker
of all of
Gamers?
my games so you can try them.
Yes.
You will love them.
I will say, that full disclosure, my students use Mermaid Adventures, Eloy's game, and we've done this for years in my RPG design class. And I remember the first time I was talking with kids about the different games we're going to play, the process, and when I said Mermaid Adventures, and one of my students, in a very particular manner of speaking, I just heard him say, kind of in the back of the room, I've always wanted to be a mermaid.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah, no, it was great. And honestly, you know, because they get to be sharks and rays and all the different, you know, get to color their characters. And oh my gosh, it's so fun.
I mean, hey, happy ending to my Star Wars story, right? Like when on the first thread where someone was complaining, hey, I want like a dude version of the Jedi character. One of the first replies was someone being like, so my daughter, you know, was like my 8-year-old daughter played Imperial Assault. The first character she went for was this Jedi, and she was so happy. Like, so screw off. Like,
Right.
And we're like, thank you, community.
Right.
And I'm just gonna bring this up, and this has nothing to do with gaming or anything, but I remember there was something that like pissed me off was when T-shirts were released for the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and none of them had Gamora on it. Oh, I wanted
Yeah.
to slap somebody.
Right.
Back to,
But violence is never the answer.
No. I
But
think in this
you did
case,
want-
I think in this case, whoever made
Yeah.
that decision, even if it won't change their decision, they just need one. They just need
Just
just
one,
one.
just
Just one. We're not into the violence of it. It's more to shock them into their stupidity.
So, does anyone have any questions, comments, even like a topic that you'd like to see? Yeah.
How much time do we have?
it was like a lot.
We have an hour, honestly.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
we're here.
yeah.
This is a 2-hour panel.
know,
We have
just
another hour.
sandwiches.
Yeah.
I have like a difficult layered question.
Oh, great. Can we
So
do it in
here-
parts or?
Here's my PayPal.
This is what you're good at. I'll pay for it.
Let's go.
I was being facetious.
I'm not.
So,
No, it's,
me and my friends have also been making an RPG for like 8 years now. And it's also like, it's in the future. We wanted to have it like, you know, all nations are gone and there's no racism or sexism. I mean, we're interesting problems. And so I wanted to do it, but I broke the world. But I'm Korean, I'm queer, I'm Jewish. So I felt confident about like Asian things and religious things and queer stuff. But then I was like, I want the world to have like obviously a bunch of people who are brown. And I was like, how do I make sure I'm not appropriate? And so because I'm not brown, but I am a person of color, I'm in this ground where I'm like, how do I know how to push it? How do I know to stop? I can't call my like black brown friends every time I have a problem because they've got shit to do.
Well, I think.
Can I take this one?
No, please.
She's got this.
Yes.
sensitivity reader. Because while you want to have people in your game, I mean, start obviously with like kind of back without knowing anything about the setting of your game.
So, well, we have a clear sensitivity reader because well, that person is ace non-binary.
Right, so if you have one sensitivity reader and you want to have black people in the game, you want to have whatever, again, without knowing the details of the game,
Right.
but let's say it's a Chicago-based game, it's noir, it's the 70s, you'd want to do some historical research first, and then still have someone read over, does this sound too ridiculous? Does this sound like over the top? Does this sound like I'm importing too much modern slang to a game set in the 70s or 80s? You know, and the thing is, with sensitivity research, you're already using one, you know, you're paying someone for their time and everything else, but you have to be receptive to that feedback. So any experience that you don't have and you're not comfortable having after you've done that initial research, and you have your characters and your settings written up, that's when you take it to someone and go, here's what I have, it's X number of words, this is my timeline, what's your rate? Can you look over this for me? And if you don't know, if you don't have time, who can go back to that? And that's anyone making games, making a setting, writing a novel, whatever you're doing, it is better to err on the side of, I want someone to look this over, than to put it out in the world and have everyone go, what is this? What did you do? Because there have been many things where I looked at it and I was like, you don't know a single black person, do you? But I mean, that's going to be the answer to anyone who asks that question of, if I am not X experience, and I'm going to put in my game, my setting, my book, get a sensitivity reader.
Should I find multiple sensitivity readers for like?
Yes.
All right.
So
Well,
yeah.
I'd almost start off.
That's a good answer.
I'd almost start off, and I think I said something kind of along these lines earlier, but just before you even start, maybe you get the group together to talk through it.
I guess
So
I-
it's
maybe
less
I-
about, I'm calling this person for this one thing, and really it's how do we incorporate all these cultures and all these different things into my world that I'm trying to build. Let me tell you my story, what I'm trying to do. What do you guys think about building in
Yeah.
these different things?
And I mean, if you are on a budget, time-wise, or like, you know, personally, like even if you're not, if you don't want to be that social sometimes, like this can be challenging. Or if, you know, you can't cover all your bases, which is because there are just so many kinds of people, right? Like, I think the thing you really want to do is make sure that everything you do, you're doing on purpose, right? Like, most of the problems happen when people like do something without thinking, or, you know, so you just sort of examine what your choices are and why you're making those choices for X character, X culture, and be extra careful when you're doing one that you're less familiar with, and do as much research as you can. Naturally, like, everyone's going to say do a lot of research, because do. We working in Android Netrunner, which is a cyberpunk setting that Fantasy Flight did, which was emphasized very much diversity, and it was like, okay, they don't have any of the classical like bigotry.
Yeah,
they
I
have
feel like this is more relevant because like you, it's in the future. so
right
maybe-
cyberpunk land, space future. But like in Android, there is the bigotry is not against any particular race or culture. It's against androids. It's against clones.
Yeah, we have.
And
it is a-
there's, you know, a layer, that's a layered thing. But
Let me not.
part of it is sort of what the game wanted to talk about, and also just sort of giving our fans like kind of an excuse to like, hey, here our cast is has an incredible diversity in Android Netrunner. Like, all the characters come from all sorts of cultures, and we don't need to have an excuse for that. That's just the way our space future is, right? And because this is not necessarily the thing we want to talk about, which is its own decision, right? And that was a decision. We've made the decision that we didn't want to cover necessarily racism directly. We did not want to confront homophobia directly in the stories.
I think that's a good point too, because I have done game design and I literally have had people come to me. One dude, I'm not gonna say people, one person came to me and he said, you know what, I'm writing a game and during character creation you can pick whatever race or gender or whatever you want to be, and like I've made it part of the character creation, and I'm just like, cool, that sounds awesome. And they're like, yeah, but how do I let people know about that? And I'm like, you don't. You just have it be in there.
Exactly.
Like, that's the thing.
That's the way
If
we want it
we
to
just
be.
make it the norm,
Yep.
it doesn't need. Then we don't even need these panels anymore, because then it's
Wouldn't
just,
that be
that's
great?
just what it is.
Yo,
you
actually,
know?
this brings up something that I brought up on a previous panel with you. Or do you have a thing to say? You look like you're about to. Okay, sorry. There was a thing that was brought up about visibility versus representation.
Yes.
Which is in Netrunner, actually. There is a trans character who is passing. And so we don't we didn't make huge efforts to be like, hey, this character's trans, isn't that great? We're so
Exactly.
progressive. But a lot of fans just didn't know.
Right.
And so I'm sure plenty of fans who were trans may not didn't notice, and so didn't see themselves, even though they were technically there, right?
Yeah.
And so where is that line, right? Where do we? At what point do we, want to make it visible, right? What is visibility versus representation? Because we don't want to put a giant flag on and be like, see, isn't this special? Because that already otherizes that character.
Right.
But we also don't want to be like, we don't want to appear like we're not making
Yeah.
these efforts.
Does the game is it fit? Does it need the flavor text, or is it going to be out of place to have the flavor text? So it's either is, or you have something to explain it.
Right. And it's like a card game, so there's very little
little about
within
that.
the game.
Yeah.
It's in the
So
novel
it's
that it's
there.
that it's referenced broadly, but it's not. Yeah, most players didn't know.
Yeah.
Don't
So
know.
it's just there.
It's just
and
kind of there, and we
that's okay.
we try and get it more out there without seeming gauche.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's something I personally don't know the answer to. It's something I'm struggling with.
I don't know that
Right.
anyone.
And I'm a writer. Like I write every day. I write lots of different stuff. I try to write in every genre and all the things. And those are questions, like the questions that you have are the questions that I think all writers are asking themselves every day. Like I guess it's assumed everybody can write a white character. There's nothing different about a white character, basically. So everybody's just assumed you can all write white characters, but then as soon as you want to add a black character, well, now we need a sensitivity reader, and now we need to make sure that we're making sure that everything is, it's like what I do is, personally, as I write people as people.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's it. Like people are people, and like that might be a black person, or this might be a Hispanic person, but I just write them all as people. That was actually, I don't remember the author, but somebody asked him, they said, how do you write your female characters so convincingly? And he's just like, I just write them like they're men, because he just writes everybody the same, basically,
Right.
is what he's trying to say. Didn't have the right
People are
words
people.
for it back in the 50s when he answered that question, whoever that author was, since I can't remember his name. But, it's like that sort of thing. Like, it is sort of an issue that needs to be addressed. And then it's also one that, kind of also doesn't need to be addressed. I mean, it's a weird kind of limbo kind of thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh boy.
I mean,
no.
that's the thing. Like he said earlier, like we don't have all the answers. Like
Well,
I have
we
questions
don't.
too about all of this.
Well, we don't. So I wound up jumping on a panel earlier today about inclusivity, and it was specific to streaming, but this came up a lot, where you have to think about if you're someone, let's say you're a white person, you're writing a book or you're writing a setting, you're creating characters, and you want to be inclusive and you want to do your due diligence, and you're not doing the colors of Benetton, we have one gay person, one brown person, one woman, where you are actually just creating a world that is vibrant and diverse like the actual world, you still may mess up cultural markers. You still may not think about things like food or ethnicity or certain like ritual, because a lot of times people in fantasy settings always eat stew. I'm guilty of it myself. Like everyone has camp stew, and no one ever thinks about like food and seasonings. As you travel, people have spices. So do you err on the side of I don't want to mess this up and potentially offend someone,
Right.
Or do you go, I'm just not going to take that chance? Because I think what it comes down to a lot is fear, and this came up in another panel, is people are so afraid of messing up. They're so afraid of being called a racist, not actually being a racist, but being called a racist, being called whatever, that you're being exclusionary, when most of the time it is not maliciousness. It is, I don't have to think about it, so it never occurred to me.
Thoughtlessness.
Right.
And not even thoughtlessness, because I think thoughtlessness is usually coupled with intentional maliciousness, at least the way I've experienced it.
Has some mean connotations. That's true.
Well, I think not even like ignorance, but almost like oblivious. Like you didn't even know that was a thing.
Right.
And
Okay,
so
yeah.
you just wait, what? I didn't even see that over
Right,
there.
so a project I'm on, I'm trying to think how I can talk about without breaking NDA.
Hooray!
But a project I'm on, the topic of black hair came up, and the way that they'd given this character braids, and well, that's cool. Braids need maintenance. Your hair grows out, or if they're synthetic, someone has to maintain this. Or if you have locks, surprise, you wash your hair when you have dreadlocks. They didn't really think about it. 'Cause I'm like, if you have a black character like what clearly has fake braids and fake hair, and there's not a mention of them either taking the braids out or getting their hair done because they're white people. They did not have to think about this.
They're like, yeah, you just brush it, right?
Yeah. If I had $1. But things like that where there's such a great fear of screwing up to begin with and then going, I can never do this again, I can never try, versus putting your best foot forward, going, okay, I put this thing in the world, or I'm putting it in your hands, please look at it for me, or with the caveat of, I did my research, I did whatever, so I know we're at Gen Con, but I bring up Mafia 3 a lot.
Yeah.
Primarily a white dev team, but they did have a senior black writer, they did get consultants, and you can tell that they actually had someone on the team, but also looking at the game.
Loved Mafia 3. Okay.
We should talk.
We will.
But that's a game where you can say, yes, it was a white dev team mostly, but they got it right. They did their research. They looked at 68 Louisiana.
Due diligence.
And they also didn't shy away from the racism of the time.
Right.
So that's something where, had they tried to do the utopia racism is gone, it wouldn't work because they said in 68 Louisiana.
Right.
So there's a lot of factors of what is it I'm trying to do, what story am I trying to tell, does it benefit the story to include racism, to include this trauma, and am I doing it just for the sake of doing it? Because I feel like sometimes people just have that as, well, as black characters, so of course I gotta be mad about racism or slavery. It's like, that's not all I think about,
Right.
So
They have to make their stew.
they have to make their stew. Yes, the racism stew.
White people call it a melting pot because they just think, they're trying to be helpful. You had a question.
It was actually answered in the previous question.
Yeah. In one of our ramblings.
Fantastic.
Other questions?
I have an additional question.
Some follow-ups?
Someone else want to go first? Please.
Rock, paper, scissors.
I know it's like dinner time, but y'all are just
We'll
staring
alternate,
at
so we'll
us.
go you. And
Go ahead.
So my Pathfinder group, I'm the only cisgender hetero. I'm heteroflexible, but I'm the only hetero-identified person. But I'm also the only person of color. And my friend group is very mixed, gender and race, and I don't see that in my 6 degrees of separation, where they also have diverse friend groups. And in my opinion, that's where you get issues like that of people thinking that they can answer questions about black hair, even though they do not have black hair and have never touched black hair with consent.
yeah. Thank you for that, by the way. Thank you. Oh my God.
And that is how you get to communities where you can have conversations about consent where people are actually talking about whether or not it's okay to touch black people like we're pets in the zoo. And how do you address the community people? These codes of conduct really don't seem to be helping.
I just want to be very.
I was doing my villain steeple of my finger.
Fair enough. I'm working very hard because I like to talk a lot, so I don't want to trample anyone.
Not more than me.
Fair.
Go ahead.
But I find a lot of RPG groups do have they need to establish a social contract, right? And I think that is slowly becoming more part of RPG culture. Because this idea of having a social circle that is understanding, that knows how to interact with each other. Because RPGs and gaming in general is a pretty intimate experience, right? We're hanging out with each other very closely, and we can get very emotionally charged in these experiences. So you need to have these very clearly established, hey, here's what people are comfortable with. And you also need things like ripcords. I know I don't know if they do this here, but I know at some gaming conventions I've been at, RPG tables that bring a bunch of strangers together. They have elements okay, here, there's a button at the center of the table. If anything is happening that you're kind of uncomfortable with, or you would like the conversation to move on, just touch the button, and we'll move on. No questions asked, and that's it.
It's referred to as the X card.
Yeah, the X card. Everyone agrees to this. And that sort of thing is important and something that I think we should really be encouraging more in the gaming culture. I think that sort of conversation needs to happen, right? This sort of communication and this sort of understanding. I think more game rule books should open with stuff like that, particularly ones with more heavy subject matter. There are games about trauma. There are games that heavily feature things like war. And they should be hey, if talk to your players, find out what kind of game they've come to sit down for, and as players talk to each other, like if some of them are uncomfortable with this or that, like element of this setting or element of the world, ask them, right? Don't leave it to them to bring it up when it happens and makes them unhappy, right?
Yeah, I think we need to think about the geek social fallacy of we're all nerds together and we all love everything. We don't love everything the same. Let's just establish that. Because my experience as a black geek is going to be very different than your experience. Or even Eloy, surprise, 2 black people do not think alike.
What?
I know! Amazing!
I thought we were twins.
I mean, and at the table, beside the X card and things like that, kind of when you're having character creation, or what a lot of people call session 0, is establish a social contract that time. But if you're noticing that as you spread out and like you're the one black friend, or you got a multicultural friend group but the rest of the folks don't, let's go, do you not know other black people beside me? I mean, because if you're really friends, that would be a question I would ask, because if I always wind up getting so I want to do this in a game and blah, 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 or I have a question about blackness, and you're clearly the only black person I know, and I don't want to have somebody work and get fired. Ask them why they don't have other black friends. Like, do you leave your area? Do you know anyone beside me? If you go to conventions, do you talk to other people? Because the not knowing other people, unlike you, is part of this issue.
Oh yeah.
Like straight up, this is my second year at Gen Con. I'm not playing games with anybody I don't know. Because of those things. Because I don't go into game stores anymore. But I buy stuff is from the people I know that make games, or I buy them online. Because we've gotten to the point where I walk in a game store and I just see scruffy white dudes. I don't see women, period, or I don't see black folks. I don't see black women, So that is my big red signal. So part of it is making sure that when shops come to us and say, well, how can I get more people of color? How can I get more women? How can I get more queer folks? You can't just put a rainbow flag in your window in June and take our money and mark everything pink.
Yeah.
You can't just, say, well, it's Black History Month for 28 days out of the year. We're going to care about you and your money. It's getting more people to branch out. Because the whole idea, if you're a Gen Con, you're strangers, you should talk to people. If you're at a table, if I'm sitting with you for 4 hours, I would like to at least get to know you a little bit.
Yeah.
If I'm going to roll dice with you or whatever we're doing. So it's making people get out of their comfort zone. And that's something I keep saying on every panel is you can't sit here and not talk to people, not get to know people. Because if that geek social fallacy is we're all nerds together, then why don't you know nerds wherever strike? And why can't you have the conversation of when Finn was announced with Star Wars and everything else that you're mad, you're making it political. If I can't just sit here and roll dice with you, drink a beer, are we really at that point?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of that is some of that is segregated neighborhoods. And
in Chicago.
Like if you live in a place that has a lot of black people, you're gonna hang out with other black people. If you hang in a place that has a lot of white people, you're gonna hang out with white people. So some of that is segregated, and sadly, it's too prominent in our nation. But there actually are a lot of very nicely integrated towns where there's tons of lots of people, and then you still have that issue, and then that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, because I grew up in a small northwestern Ohio town. I only knew white people. Mm-hmm. I was the brown kid that stayed for the winter. For me to have those experiences growing up and having those kinds of friend groups, it would have been impossible. Yeah. There was only one other person of color in my school that I formed a relationship with, and she was Cambodian. And we're the only people that talk anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, it is difficult to when you're in a situation where you're already in a situation that is segregated, that you're seen as the other, to share these kinds of experiences when you don't have those people around.
Well, one question that I have. Sorry, do we have? Go
I
ahead.
have a question that ties into this because as an example of one of Lena's white friends who has a predominantly white social circle, I think a lot about how do you, at this point in my life, adding in all of the factors of I'm in my 30s, it's hard to make friends sometimes, all of those other things, how do you intentionally try to bring diversity into your own circle when exactly without hey, you don't look like me, let's be friends. Like, it's still, you still have to like follow what I follow, like the principles of how I connect with people. Like, I don't want to be friends with someone just for the sake of being friends with them. Like, I still want to have a personal connection with them. And I actually quit my gaming group a few years ago because I had such a negative experience with it, and haven't joined a gaming group since because I just don't even want to risk it, and I don't want to try and put myself in a place where it's like meeting strangers or meeting strangers who are going to be assholes to me. And I have a local board game group that we have a lot of representation in terms of gender and sexual identity, but we're all white. And I do live in a town where there is diversity, but as the hipsters keep moving in, sort of like there's, anyways.
I mean,
so yeah, it's like, how do you naturally try and figure out how to, I mean, like you're talking about bringing diversity into gaming groups, but it's like, if you're that gaming group and you're trying to reach out to people, like, how do you do that?
I think it's certainly really significant. Like, we should acknowledge that a lot of social circles and friendships are based on shared backgrounds, shared experiences, right? We're all gamers, so we're all hanging out, right? And like that can be true of like we all grew up in the same neighborhood, we all grew up with the same food. All those things can lead to social circles forming. So it's like there's no it's not stunning that you might have a social circle that is predominantly, people who are like you in one way or another, right? Like my entire social circle is, most of my social circle is comparatively affluent, right? Because I, had a fair amount of money growing up, right? I had a fairly privileged upbringing. And so that is something that I have to deal with and might be, is easier to address than say your situation, because monetary divides are more common, I guess, because in Minnesota, right, like I was like looking for like, hey, I wonder if there's other Asian people within 2 miles of here. Actually, there's a fairly substantial Hmong population, but they're like down in, they're like in a lot of the agricultural areas and like not really in the cities, right? And so sometimes you don't have that opportunity as easily, and it might lead to like being able to travel, being able to make friends. Those are privileges. Yeah. Being social is a privilege. Like being able to make a lot of friends and make a varied social circle. So I don't want to like shame people for not having a Benetton ad as a friend group, or not being a member of the Power Rangers, we'll say.
Well, and in saying that, it's not trying to shame anyone. But, again, coming back to, if we're all here and you see someone, or if you're sharing a table with someone, you can say hello and not just be like, oh, I like games, you like games, we should be buddies. Mm-hmm. But if you're seeing someone who is not like you, especially at an event like this or other things, and I can understand not wanting to go into a game store, but also try online, follow people that are talking about games. Follow what they're saying, see what they're doing, because a lot of the friendships I've got now actually started online. Because while I live in Chicago, I didn't know a lot of people within the city that were playing games, because not having a car, living in Chicago, it's kind of hard to get to places where game tournaments are happening or things, because a lot of people apparently think the suburbs is the only space where gaming events happen. I don't see a lot of stuff happening in the city. Because people ran to the suburbs and they were scared of brown folks and they made stores out there, and the brown folks are in the city. If they do stuff, it's assuming, well, you must live close by, even if you live on the north side or the south side. But, I mean...
Get to any of the nerdy stuff in Chicago.
Yeah, and by Chicago, I mean actual 606 zip code.
Proper Chicago.
Yes. But, I mean, and I'm not trying to be facetious, but I say start online, find folks, if you... I don't know if you know each other. Yes.
It's been a few years.
Okay. Well, you have a black friend. Meet her friends too.
I live in Michigan. We're childhood friends. So
tricky.
But the internet exists, and
Right.
Facebook.
And she just said you should like have 5 new friends. So she
Right.
It's like
Reach out to us on Twitter. We'd be happy.
I'm more Facebook myself.
No, fine.
I'm on Twitter too, but I'm more Facebook.
You're less. I mean, Twitter.
So I've got a question.
I'll do it like
Sidebar.
Yeah. What happened?
Go ahead. Question.
Yeah.
So games are art. Art can reflect the world we see. Art can change how people see the world. And how can you, as game content creators, do you see a way for you? Is there some sort of goal, mission? Are you active? How can you actively create shifts in how people see the world through the art of games?
I think that, this is something that specifically happened in my career. Dead of Winter wasn't going to have the artist that it ended up having, but I ended up reaching out to her because I was like, I don't want my game to look like that. I want it to look like this. And I just kind of offered her the job before I got approval from my boss because I knew it would be better. I knew it would be better. I knew it would be able to represent more characters. I knew it would be able to tell a better story. And not everybody has the power and the privilege to do that with your studios, but when you have the opportunity to push for more diversity, push for more inclusion, and push for artists that are also of color, that are from different places, do it. Do it. As a designer, as a person that's bringing this into the world, you have some power and some say into how it's going to be represented. It can be difficult sometimes.
I think we can, but it's hard because this has come up before, teaching people empathy and learning through games, because like we've already said, there's some people that are lost already. Just your 10%, they're done. They're not going to come along no matter what you do. But it's hard to have that in games, be it tabletop or video games, because some people just, it's almost like you have to beat them over the head with it sometimes. And and seriously, like if you try to be subtle, like you were talking about the game where you have a trans character and no one realized it, in trying to be subtle and teach a lesson, you may not get there. So I think we have to be very blatant, but find that line between being blatant and beating someone over the head going, look at this, learn something.
Right. Because like transference is a big thing. Like in education, you teach them something cool, they can do it in that moment. Do they see how this applies to other things? And so even if you make something that's very like symbolic in terms of like a role-playing game, do people say, oh, do they get it, do they not?
Right, and I think it's harder, especially on the video game side, where it's like you have limited time, you have finite time with the game, versus tabletop. But tabletop depends on who's at the table, who's running the game, who's writing the story. So I think it's possible, but it takes a lot of work and a very well-intentioned and try to think of the word, a good storyteller to get people there. And sometimes, unless you like literally go, no, this is your plot point, you need to go here and do this, you pick up this point, they're not going to get it.
I think we got a question over here before I yammer on.
I had a question specific to that push for diversity, including like handicapped characters.
Absolutely.
Typically in like RPG games or whatnot, any sort of handicap has like a negative connotation to it. But I've seen handicapped people like drive with their feet, and I find that to be pretty positive. It takes a certain level of willpower. And you find any other ways that you should be kind of pushing in order to change that initial mindset?
I'm all for overcorrecting. Like, I think, what's that game? One Deck Dungeon, for example. The entire cast is female. That's it. Like, they're just that, they've committed to that model, and it's just like all the playable characters are female, and that's just like what they've decided to do. And they've gotten a little stick for that from, certain angry fans, but other fans are thrilled and think it's crazy awesome. Exactly, it's super cool.
Right.
Like, I think that,
That's why I'm going to go buy it now.
I mean,
Sure, it's going to sell out. They're not going to make it again.
I was really proud when a game reviewer looked over my game Bargain Quest and was like, I think this may be the brownest game I've ever seen, because like over half of some of the decks are, people of color or, dark skinned people, and it's like it was a very intentional choice. We were like, okay, let's make the majority of characters people of color. I think there was a game on the floor that I will not name that I looked that has a whole deck of different and interactable characters. And I just went through and I just sorted out like people of color, even like people who are like kind of maybe ambiguously. I put them in one side and everyone else on the other side. And also there was like a monkey in it, so that might tip your hand.
Yeah,
anyway.
Coming here in a wheelchair.
And so like, and I looked, and the size of decks were about like that, right? And this is, the smaller one is, I just held out my hands and this is being recorded, so that's a little, anyway. The size difference was tremendous, and that was for all other demographics that weren't white people. versus white people. I mean, I think the male-female ratio is actually pretty strong, so that's like good. And I brought this up with the designer, and they were very receptive to my point. So, you know, like again, I think it wasn't malicious. It was just not being.
So, in a tabletop vein, at least, because again, I'm a member of the IGDN, and we take in lots of different game designers from different communities and whatnot, and we have several who are from disabled and handicapped communities. I don't know the right wording, so sorry if that was offensive. But like, there's a couple that are like very standout right now. One is Jacob Wood. He actually has a gaming company called Accessible Games. He's actually visually impaired, and he actually works a lot on making games that appeal to people with accessibility issues. There's also another. Her name is Elsa Henry. And she has like vision and hearing issues. She's actually working on, for instance, a whole book about accessibility using the Fate system. So I mean, there are companies and there are projects that are out there, and there are those people. For instance, I'm going to be working with Jacob Wood pretty soon here on a game called Super Able. It's going to be for the PIP system, and it's going to be kids with disabilities who are fighting the demons that are representations of the way that people make them feel about themselves when they see their disabilities. And like, it's going to be an amazing game because we outlined it. So it's in the works. But like, there are people who are trying to make those games, and those people also, they deserve representation as well.
And going back to my theme of the kids are all right, one of my students, they're in groups writing adventures for different RPG systems, and one of them, all the characters were female except for one male, and they called it reverse smurfing.
Do it.
Well, just to the point, I mean, this question I think was specifically about differently abled people, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I think that to that in any games, it's like I think you think to the theme first, right? So we're in Rome. If the theme is in Rome, it's probably going to be very likely that you're going to have a lot of white people in Rome, right? Because it's Rome in Caesar's time or whatever. But if you do any historical research, you're going to find out. You're going to know what would somebody who was differently abled in that time have to deal with. Does that character make sense in this game? Can we add a character like this to this game and have it not seem out of place? And I think that's really where you have to go. Is it going to seem forced when you put it in there? Because okay, I'm doing a Rome game. I can't put a person with a wheelchair in there and have that make sense necessarily. But what was it like? Mm-hmm. What was it like for a differently abled person in that time? And does that person make sense in this game? Then we go that route. And it's definitely not an easy thing to do, but it should be done. It should be thought through. And we should all do better and be asked those questions on a regular basis. Yeah.
Just keep in mind.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you've now given me something to think about. I'm like, look, like in my head, I've been burning through. Okay, the next few games that we have coming up, and like, what is that going to look like? Mesoamerica is a game. There's a game based in Mesoamerica. What does that look like? What are we missing there? You've now made me think about that, and I'll go back to our dev team and our artists. But I would also say to the part about the art that you brought up a moment ago is that when we look for art, we look at artists, we look at, do they even understand how to make diversity? There was somebody I saw that I was like, I really love this art. They really know how to draw brown-haired women because they all look the exact same. Every woman that was drawn looked identical, and I was like, beautiful, really well done art, but all the women looked exactly the same. And it just didn't work for me. And so can the artist expand for you, first of all? So you look at their art, you look at their portfolio, and you see what they've done. And then a good artist, you can say, here's what we're looking for. Here are some things. Now come back to me with your ideas. And they're going to come back to you with, if you pigeonhole them too much. I know I used that term earlier, but if you do that, then, the artists are actually very helpful in helping us make sure that the games are getting the diversity that they need and making sure that we're including everyone, not just, the different colors of skin, not just gender, everything. Mm-hmm. And so you really have, you've woken me up to that. Like, I don't think we have had a game where we've had a chance to think about that yet, and it's time we do. It really is. And so thank you.
Isaac?
I mean, and a lot of the times too, it's a position of the art director to really give the artist that reference, because so many times we can, if we give an artist, hey, we need a character, the standard for so long has been the standard is white. You know, so they're not thinking about it, even if they are people of color sometimes, because they are so expected to deliver white.
Yeah.
So
give
you
them
really
the agency to do it. Say it. Yes, we want you to.
Yes, and so you really have to put in that forethought, the art, working with your art directors, trying to get those things moving. Luckily, I was the art director for Plaid Games for many years, and now my brother is actually the art director for the company. And something that we focus on too is representing characters that do have handicap. In Neon Gods, we have characters in wheelchairs. We have characters with missing limbs. In Dead of Winter, we have that as well. And one of the things that I've been struggling with is that I actually am very close with someone who suffers from a disability that is not visual at all, you know, and trying to represent those things in games is much more challenging. So it's also about including the story along with that, trying to, you know, because sometimes you can't necessarily always judge a person by what you're seeing. So even if they are in a wheelchair, it doesn't mean that they're unable to do everything that they need to do, you know, and representing that through story.
And be specific when writing art briefs as an art director. Like, I've written some where it's like, oh, this character is dark skinned, and they came back as a white person with a tan. And I'm like, all right, let's try that again.
I have an entire chart where we literally just say this person is from Argentina, and we have pictures of people from Argentina.
Yes.
Like we go that far into it. We don't just do brown, white. We just like, this is where this person's from. This is how they look. This is the shape of their eyes. Things like that.
On the mechanical side, though, you did make a note about, like, you know, a character with a disability having a mechanical penalty, or, you know, something, or like maybe having a Daredevil thing where it's like, oh, see, they're bad at this, but this other thing completely makes up for it, right? And there's no one right answer to that. Like, I love that in Dead of Winter, none of the characters have any real, like, stat modifiers for whatever they have, right? They're the character with their unique ability, and it's not about whether they're missing a limb or whether they're, you know, whatever. It's just about their character.
I know by definition it's handicapped, you know, there's a lot of people in their minds.
Right, they have this idea, but there's, you know, taking it to, like, for, like, Asian characters or whatever, like, you have stories where it's like, oh, we're treating these Asian characters like anyone else, and there's no alteration. They wear the same clothes all the other characters in the game are wearing, or whatever. And another one where the Asian character wears, you know, super Asian outfits and represents the Asian culture, whatever. Those are both those can both be valid, but they can also be exclusive, right? Whether you want to give handicapped people more particular to represent their struggle. Because some people might think, oh, you've shown us, but you're not showing how difficult it might be or how, you know, the things I'm dealing with, whereas you're very directly addressing those in your games.
Right.
But this is why we need more, right? It would, like, because the issue then becomes like, oh, the one game that has representation, it needs to be good at literally everything because it's all we have right now. That's not enough. We need games of all kinds with all sorts of representation, trying all sorts of different things, taking it at various angles so then, you know, people who want to see themselves represented in the way they want to be represented can have that. And I think that's really important.
Right. It has to be done thoughtfully.
And one thing from one of my games in development is a dexterity game, and one of my favorite gamers has Parkinson's, and he couldn't really play it, you know, and so especially in a game that's like very specifically about physical ability, it's going to cut people off, and that's okay. I mean, like, you have to make some choices, but on the other hand, you know, we were talking about all these different ways, like the game could be modified, the components could be modified, but then of course it's already, like, you know, in terms of component costs, you know, the more specialized you get. So, you know, you do make those choices. The thing that I think boggles my mind more is when you're looking at the art direction of a game and there's, you know, red-green colorblind issues, that you don't have symbols on colors. I mean, colorblindness is a male thing. I mean, there's a very small percentage of women who are colorblind. You know, like it's a pretty heavy, percentage for that men are colorblind. So if we're that's one thing I think is kind of funny in terms of, like, you know, where game design is kind of missing the boat a little bit here too, is, you know, that they're not even catering to men sometimes in terms of that.
We got you next. We got you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I know of a board game that that has different rules because it's bottom of the ninth. So bottom of the ninth has special rules for rolling dice because in the game you're rolling off against somebody, and some people can't do that. So we have special rules written in for that. What do you think about doing that?
So bottom of the ninth, so to get it on the recording, bottom of the ninth as the game has special rules for people who can't necessarily roll dice or, play the game in like the way that.
I mean, like absolutely. I mean, like it could be modified, like where if anything else, like on a cup to like pour or something like that. You know what I mean? But but just in like that moment as a developer when I'm sitting there at the table for my friend and he can't really play my game, and you realize like. There's ways you can modify it for sure,
Absolutely.
certainly.
Happy Salmon is one of my favorite examples. Like Happy Salmon is a very wacky game where one of the cards has players running around in a circle. Not everyone can do that. Some people, I played it with a person with a broken leg and like it's not a disability, they were just injured that day and couldn't. But luckily the rules have like in the rule book there's like, hey, instead of running around the table, you have to trade cards with each other. Like, with one hand you have to swap cards, which is in its own way kind of challenging and might leave out people who, can't do that. But having those options it's a good gesture and, it is an example of people doing their best to be as inclusive as possible. And I think that is always great.
Right.
And there is, there are logistical limitations that that are unfortunate and we have to deal with, but our goal, the ideal is that we can get everyone playing games and everyone enjoying our games.
Right.
Kind of going back for like 20 minutes ago to the original question that you had asked before, which was like, can games like make statements and whatnot? And I definitely believe that they can. Obviously, they're. I mean, and you get that a lot actually within the more indie games. RPG wise than you do, traditional games.
Gesturing at me.
Yes. You don't get any from this guy.
You get it from Isaac.
It's a game called Dogs in the Vineyard.
Oh yeah.
For instance, which is like I can't even describe it. Like you're gonna play it and you're just gonna cry when you're done with it. But like a newer game is called Velvet Glove. It's called Velvet Glove. By Sarah Richardson, and it's all about young girls, and it's kind of like all characters are girls. You make a young girl, and you learn as you make your character that the world only sees you, as like basically an object, and you learn through the game that the only ways that you can affect the world are either through sex or through violence, because those are the only tools that our society has given women in order to actually affect change. And the game basically makes you make this character, and then you spend the time breaking all that down. And it's one of those things that if you just sit down and you play it, and you're like, it was kind of intense and like, it made me think and it was awesome, but it was also fun, because honestly in the end, like it's real, like I said Dogs in the Vineyard first, but nobody like plays Dogs in the Vineyard because everybody buys it and they all say, we're going to play it one day. And then they're like, no, because I really don't feel like being depressed right now. But it's a beautifully written game that definitely does make a statement.
If we're plugging stuff, have you played #Feminism or seen the book?
Yes.
Yeah, like there's a gaming book called #Feminism, which is a collection of micro games, which are all about each game is like kind of its own small event to teach, sort of to get the players having conversations about about topics that are very close and sometimes very difficult to talk about, or just kind of things that people might not have always experienced. There's an entire game that basically is designed to simulate what mansplaining feels like. And it's intense, and it's like it's excellent. It's made by a lot of really awesome designers. I highly recommend anyone who's possibly interested to check it out. It's also on Drive-Thru RPG. I'm not being paid by them. I just think it's great.
And I'll point out that one of the contributors to #Feminism, her name is Misha Bushager. She's one of the partners in my new company, which is New Agenda. Nice. So yeah.
Well, you know the best joke about mansplaining? What does a mansplainer drink from?
A well, actually.
That's good. That's good.
Well,
Do we have more
I don't even
questions?
know.
I think we're getting close to time.
We
We
have
wanna
10
make
minutes
sure-
left. We honestly went way further than we thought, but you.
Just, I was thinking, tagging off of disability and mechanics, I was wondering if you could speak to how many horror games use sanity meters as a mechanic?
Too many.
Yeah. I don't let my students do it because when then it lends itself to a big discussion about why it's not appropriate to, I mean, like Cthulhu and all that, sure, fine, but as far as using it as a tool to drive a game, I want them to choose more creative methods of driving games than just sort of like fallback, stereotypical, not illustrative, clumsy kind of approach to, showing damage. So I don't let them.
It's low hanging fruit, right? Because it's really just a hit point meter with a kind of problematic theme, right? And a lot of games use it because people know about it. And it's kind of for the same reason that a lot of games use the Tolkien-esque idea of race, which has its own deep plethora of issues. And I think it's one of those things. It's a habit that I think is slowly dying out, particularly in the RPG community, right? Like no one does that. Like people are walking away from hit points, which are also kind of a weird abstraction that has no real reflection in the real world. And that's kind of how I see sanity meters. They make very little real sense because it's like in the same way that hit points do, this hard numerical value for this really broad idea of physical and mental wellness, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think we're all in agreement, right? They're silly and archaic. Right? Yeah. So I'm glad that that's. Do you disagree?
No, not with that.
Oh, okay.
I was going to add to that.
Yeah.
Basically, my very first game, I used races. But it was very purposeful in its use because the game is called Apocalypse Prevention Inc. And you play human agents who are policing supernatural stuff on the world. And yeah, there's vampires and there's werewolves and they're all demons. We just call them all demons. And some demons we like and some demons are illegal. And these are all the different demon races. And you know what? If we don't like that demon race, we're going to kick them off of our planet. And basically,
these are the good ones.
Oh, and those are the good ones. But it's it was basically an allegory for immigration and whatnot, but it took years before people even realized it. Everybody was just reading the game that seems wrong. Why? Why should we? Why are we doing that? And it's just I know, right?
Why would you do that to a werewolf who's done nothing wrong?
Right. That's the worst.
History, maybe.
That's funny.
That's crazy.
Let's see where
Got
we
one in the
got.
back.
Oh yes.
So building off kind of the previous question, and I've heard a lot of people talking about getting out and experiencing, right? Your personal experiences. I know a lot of game systems use the idea of experience points as kind of just this abstract thing. Mm-hmm. It's you go out, you have these experiences, and you level up no matter what it is that you experience. Have any of you thought about or wondered about creating a system where not all experiences are necessarily going to give you experience points, right? So if you want players to experience diversity, you go experience diverse situations.
There's a system I quite like that uses experience in a very different way, where it is using that abstraction, that mechanical abstraction, which is useful of experience points. But it's Burning Wheel and Mouse Guard in particular. In order to improve a skill, you need to succeed at a number of tests equal to your rank in that skill, but you also need to fail at a number of tests equal to your ranks in that skill. So the better you get at something, the harder it becomes to improve because you need to challenge yourself. And I think it is a much more accurate representation of being able to improve a skill or a talent because in order to get better, you can't in Skyrim, you just craft the same iron knife a million times, and you can make anything, right? And that's not accurate and becoming less and less satisfactory as a system. And I think as we grow, we are going to get better ones.
Sorry, you want to go first?
Yeah.
Okay, go first. I talk too much, and it's okay. I'll let you go.
Well, a lot of the times what I've done, or either as a GM or just in playing games with other people, instead of you killed 10 things and you get 20 XP, it's you role play this scene very well. It was emotional, it was meaningful. So you get some kind of points that aren't just XP, but it'll give you a stat bonus later. It actually means something that you played out your god has abandoned you, and this was a very touching scene. Because if I just want to go kill 20 rats, I can go do that in Skyrim or something else. So getting away from experience for certain things is something I've thought about, because like grinding for XP is boring at some point. So especially in a narrative thing like role playing, if I'm having an emotional moment with a character or with the GM or in a scene, I think it's more rewarding to give that to someone for that moment of playing out a thing versus you succeeded in combat, you killed the boss, here's 500 XP, now you're level 8.
Is that more difficult to do in video games?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, but like where, I mean, are there games that do those sorts of things where like, I mean, it's different in role-playing games because it's just like, we're just hanging out and we're just socializing.
I mean,
and I'm like, yeah, get XP for that thing. But like, you guys have to codify that and put it into the program and like all the like, are there games that do that sort of thing?
So video game RPGs are a little different in that, you will have cutscenes, you'll have things like that where, the story advances, but it's not so much you get, there's not a number that pops up, you survived a cutscene, here's 20 XP.
Yeah, exactly.
In some cases, it really
Plus
is
3 Paragon points.
Well, I wasn't trying to say Mass Effect, but I mean, Dragon Age is one of the things, Mass Effect, where it's like, or you made a decision, let's say you went Renegade, you went Paragon, or a Telltale game, where it's like, so-and-so will remember that, and that advances the plot.
Yeah.
But there's not like a big number kind of going, you made this right choice, we've assigned a value to it.
I gotcha.
All right, I think that's our cue.
That was our hint.
Are you guys going
Yeah, so I want to thank all of our guests for being up here. And our awesome moderators. I mean, the one thing for me is like when I got into gaming, I just fell in love with gaming and all the people in it, and I think you guys are examples of some of the best people, and so thank you for your time spending it here today. Want to make sure everybody knows that Tanya has a book that's available, and there's a code for 20% off. And it's all about Tales. You want to talk about your book? I'll let you talk about your book.
So really quickly, I edited an anthology of people in the industry who are marginalized and they're telling their stories. It's by CRC Press. Unfortunately, it's not here, but you can order it either through Amazon or the publisher directly. Mm-hmm. And flyers are somewhere in the back, so 20% off.
Awesome.
Yes.
We will also collect your tickets if you had tickets for the event back to you on your
Yes.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Gen Con.
You guys are